Welcome, everybody. My name is Professor Matthew Wood, and I'm the director of the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre.
And welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mukesh Jain. I'm the co-director of the Oxford-Harrington Center and Chief Scientific Officer for the Harrington Discovery Institute.
Can we have the first slide, please? So we'd like to welcome you to this Rare Disease Day webinar hosted by the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre. And I'd like to briefly run through the agenda that we have for the webinar today. My colleague Mukesh and I will give you a brief introduction to the Rare Disease Centre. We then have a series of short stakeholder messages from some of our partners and ambassadors. And that will be followed by a guest lecture from Professor Chas Bountra, who is a Pro-Vice Chancellor here in the University of Oxford. And following that, to round up, we will have a Q&A session, which Mukesh and I will host. And specifically for that Q&A session, please, if you like, scroll down on the HDI-Events.org page where you're watching this webinar. There is a question box. Feel free to type in any question at any time in the webinar. There's also a QR code you can scan in with your smartphone that will allow you to send a question to us via your mobile device. All of these questions will, of course, remain private, and we will get to as many of these as we possibly can in the Q&A session. So we're going to begin with a brief introduction to the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre. Can we have the next slide, please? So we are acutely aware of the immense challenge posed by rare diseases. Approximately 350 million people across the globe suffer from a rare disease, and this translates into about 1 in every 17 people during their lifetime. It's a very personal thing, rare disease. That means we probably all know several people suffering from a rare disease. These diseases, unfortunately, have a disproportionate impact on children. And many of those children who are affected don't live beyond their 5th birthday. Fewer than 5% of these rare diseases have FDA-approved drug treatments. That means greater than 95% of rare diseases, of which there are approximately 7,000, have no treatment. Next slide, please. So accordingly, we have established the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre to address this challenge. And our vision is a bold vision commensurate with the scale of this challenge. Our vision is to combine excellence in research and drug discovery and development to cure rare diseases worldwide. And our mission, the mission of our Rare Disease Centre, is very explicitly to develop and deliver new medicines for patients suffering from rare disease. Next slide, please.
So the Oxford-Harrington Center integrates the capabilities of both institutions in a truly unique effort. Oxford brings world-class science and technology. The Harrington Discovery Institute brings expert knowledge and capability to develop medicines. And in the Oxford-Harrington Center, we combine these complementary strengths to address unmet needs in rare disease. Next slide. Our route to success relies on 3 critical components: knowledge, capability, and environment. Specifically, we seek to combine disease expertise within our organizations, an ever-expanding network of scholars that we support globally, key technologies and therapeutic platforms, and pharma-level capability in academia that supports therapeutic development, intellectual property considerations, and the conduct of clinical trials. But, and I wish to underscore this point, we cannot do this alone. We need all of you. We need your partnership to join us in this journey to succeed. Patients and families, foundations, industry, government, philanthropists, and institutions. Indeed, we're very fortunate to have already established a partnership with Morgan Stanley and launched Morgan Stanley Gift Cures, powered by the Harrington Discovery Institute, that is dedicated to advancing the development of research discoveries into new cures and treatments for a broad range of diseases, and of course, rare diseases as well. Next slide. And so what is success? Stated simply, new medicines that will help transform the rare disease landscape and improve the lives of patients. A goal embraced by Professor Wood, myself, and our advisory board colleagues, Professors Bell, Hollander, and Stambler. So with those few introductory remarks, I want to thank the audience again for joining us today. And we're going to move to the next segment of our program. And for this, I'd like to introduce a collection of video messages from patients, partners, and families who are connected to the Oxford-Harrington rare disease community. These short messages convey beautifully the challenge we are seeking to address and the importance of working together as a community to achieve our mission to cure rare diseases. So if we could have the video, please.
So my name is Baroness Nicola Blackwood. I am chair of Genomics England. I used to be the Minister for Innovation in the Department of Health and Social Care, but I'm also a patient myself. I have experienced the diagnostic odyssey. It took 30 years for me to be diagnosed with the rare disease, which I live with every day. Over the next 10 years, along with Genomics England and partners in the system, the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre, I think, is going to play a really important role in making sure that we can respond to some of these challenges that I've been talking about. We are going to need to develop successful treatments and therapies for multiple rare diseases. We know that 1 in 17 people are affected by a rare disease, mostly children. Rare diseases individually are heterogeneous. They are rare, but together, as a group of patients, they're common. So it's important that we have that commitment within our research community. And that's why the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre is so important. And the work that they are planning to do through innovative drug discovery platforms and building on the existing research capabilities of Oxford University and the Harrington Discovery Institute is going, I think, to play a really important role in partnership with the rest of the rare disease community in the UK to really give us a step forward. And as a rare disease patient, I'm really excited about that. So if, as we come together as a collective of rare disease community, we know that we can make our voice heard, we know that we can make a difference in terms of policy, and we know that we can bring together these extraordinary scientific breakthroughs and make them available to patients and make a real difference to the lives of even those with the rarest conditions.
My name is Beena Shah, and I'm founder and president of Project 8P Foundation. My daughter, she was an easy baby, to say the least. She didn't cry very much and she didn't fuss. But easy babies, they get ignored. Through persistence, we finally had a genetic screen. And with some sadness, we learned she had a rare rearrangement of many genes deleted and duplicated on chromosome 8P. Important genes for this world to learn about. Perhaps clues to even common diseases. And so, of course, I assumed that scientists were studying 8P. To our dismay, there were no active researchers and certainly no expert clinicians who could tell us what to expect. Our 8P heroes, they have many challenges, and they weren't okay to just ignore. We know that if we work together with the folks at Harrington Discovery Institute, we can get closer to helping a human being. After all, this is why you and I are listening and advocating for people with rare diseases.
My name is Emily Crossley and I'm co-founder and CEO of Duchenne UK, and my son Eli has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a rare disease that mainly affects boys. I meet many parents whose children have been diagnosed with a rare disease, and they all remember that day of diagnosis with absolute clarity. The day when your life changes forever, and the day when you wish the doctor had given you as a parent a diagnosis too. A diagnosis that your child has Duchenne muscular dystrophy and that you have anticipatory grief disorder or your world is collapsing condition. Just something to try and get your head around the magnitude of this news and to give you the strength to fight for your child every day from this day forward. I think the rare disease community faces many challenges, not least the need to encourage scientists and industry to get involved with developing treatments. There's a notorious valley of death in drug development where scientists come up with a promising approach, but there's not enough money to fund it through those early stages of testing before big pharma and big industry will get involved. Duchenne UK is doing its best to bridge this valley of death by funding products which are now in clinical trial. But we need much more of this, and we need much more targeted focus on developing treatments for rare disease. One of the challenges in general for medical research is that groups tend to work in silos and information and knowledge isn't shared. I think what's so exciting about this new Centre for Rare Diseases is the approach to try and treat multiple diseases using similar platforms, and I believe this has a real opportunity for success. I think if the discovery of the vaccines in 2020 has taught us anything, it's that the power of science to change lives is fundamental, and that with the right money, focus and determination, we can get there. And I believe that the same is true for rare diseases. The spotlight has never shone more brightly on this area of medicine, and we need to pull together and work together to bring treatments to all those who so desperately need them.
I'm Rose Hacking, and I'm Zarek's mother. And come here, Zarek, just for a minute. Can we pause this just for a minute? Come on over. Ugh. This is Zarek Hacking, and he is the 8th known case of marfanoid progeroid lipodystrophy syndrome. I think that by pushing to get answers and pushing to just, you want to allow them to have the most normal life they can. Zarek's biggest struggle is going to be being picked on. I mean, he doesn't look like a normal little kid. He's been called scary. Kids shy away from him and they get nervous around him. And I had a really hard time with that for a long time, especially before we knew what was going on. But now that I know, it's like, gosh, he's a super special individual. And if you don't have the time for that, then that's your loss. Like, you're really missing out on this sweet, incredible, funny kid. My husband's like, no, like, we're going to let him live. Like, that's what he's here for. And we're here to live and love and enjoy life. And if you can't allow that for your child, then, that's just like a loss to me. I want it to be great for him.
Hi, I'm Gary Lineker and I'm here to support the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre. It's something that I'm very excited about, and I think will make a real difference to so many people's lives in the future. There are thousands and thousands of rare illnesses and diseases that really do need the research. It's a slow, often painful process, but if we don't have that research, so many people's lives will not be saved. I know from personal experience, not me personally, but through my eldest son George, who contracted acute myeloid leukemia when he was just 2 months old. And without research, without money being put into research, he wouldn't have had the chance in life that he now has. We were one of the lucky ones. He was given very little chance when he contracted the disease, and somehow he made his way through it. So hopefully through this new centre, massive amounts of work will be done into research into all sorts of different diseases, and I think it really does deserve our support. Thank you very much.
We're immensely grateful for those immensely powerful messages from some of our supporters. we'd like to move to the next segment of the program, where we have our guest lecture. And I'm very honored today to introduce you to Professor Chas Bountra to give the lecture. Professor Bountra is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Innovation in the University of Oxford, and he's also the Professor of Translational Medicine. He has a very stellar background in the pharmaceutical industry and also working in academia here in Oxford for greater than 10 years. His lecture today is titled, The Lesson from 2020, Together We Can Do the Impossible. I hope you enjoy the lecture. Can we run the video, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm sorry, I don't know where you are. Thank you to my colleagues, in particular Matthew Wood, for the invite to give this brief presentation. I gave it this rather odd title. I apologize for that. Lesson from 2020, Together We Can Do the Impossible. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a few moments. What I will also do is talk a little bit about sort of what I think is the problem or the challenge that we're facing, a possible solution to that. I think we have a great opportunity. I'll talk about some of the things that we've been doing in Oxford over the past several years. I'll also share with you some of the resources, the platforms, the expertise that we can leverage sitting here in the UK. I'll also discuss some of the things that we're currently planning in Oxford. And then I'll finish off with why I'm optimistic about the future. So, lesson from 2020, together we can do the impossible. I said that because, so let me share with you this story. So 3 years ago, a couple of our superstar academics in Oxford, Sarah Gilbert and Adrian Hill. I'm sure you will know them now. They've been in the media almost on a daily basis for the past year. I think they've become household names. They set up a company called Vaxitech about 3 years ago. And then last March, April, when the pandemic hit us, senior leadership within this university got together with Adrian and Sarah. And so John Bell, who's our Regius Professor of Medicine, one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Gavin Screeton, who's the head of our medical school, and our awesome Vice Chancellor, Louise Richardson. They got together with Adrian and Sarah. They also pulled in senior leaders in the UK government. They pulled in a couple of absolute visionaries in pharma inside AstraZeneca. So Mene Pangalos, who's the head of R&D, a friend of mine from old, and Pascal Soireau, who is the CEO. They also liaise with colleagues in the regulatory agencies and also pulled in a number of funders. And together they said, how are we going to create a vaccine for this pandemic for the world as soon as possible? We're not interested in making money. We just want to sort out this pandemic. And honestly, it is absolutely staggering to me what my colleagues here have done in the past 10 months. What normally probably would have taken them 8, 9, 10 years, they've done in 10 months. The big lessons for me from this whole saga are that if we get all the stakeholders together and we agree a single goal, a focus, and everybody's pulling in the same direction, everybody inside academia, everybody inside industry, the funders, the regulators, etc., etc., I'm convinced we can do the impossible. It's about collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. The other thing, of course, is all of these individuals I've just mentioned, they are brilliant leaders. They are amazing innovators, and they are some of the most awesome entrepreneurs. Inside Vaxitech, inside the university, inside AstraZeneca, inside government, etc. It's people, people, people. What we're doing, it's a team sport, trying to discover new medicines for patients. It's a team effort. What's also happened here in Oxford over the past more than 20 years, John Bell, who I've already mentioned, used to be the head of our Nuffield Department of Clinical Medicine, and then Peter Ratcliffe took over from him. He got the Nobel Prize last year. And then a couple of years ago, Richard Cornell took over from Peter. Now, these three individuals over the past 20 plus years, they have invested in some amazing institutes. So the Jenner Institute, so Adrian Hill is the head of that institute, Sarah Gilbert is part of that institute. This is a large group of experts in vaccine development, generation, et cetera, et cetera. They've been working together for more than 20 plus years. In this department, we've also got a clinical biomanufacturing facility, which of course is key. And also they've set up global health institutes. So in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Kenya, et cetera, et cetera. These institutes have got more than 20 years of infrastructure investment. They've got some amazing technologies. They've got deep expertise. They are full of scientists, clinicians, epidemiologists, data scientists, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons why in Oxford we were able to respond to this pandemic so quickly. The other lesson, I suppose, is that over the past year we've seen people across the world looking to scientists to get us out of this pandemic. They had been looking to people like us to come up with vaccines or new therapeutics, et cetera, et cetera. And they've also been looking to universities, in particular Oxford. In fact, over the past year, I've had many colleagues all over the world say to me, why is Oxford on the news on a daily basis? And it is. People like Sarah and Adrian and Andrew Pollard are being mentioned on a daily basis. And I think the one thing, and of course I'm very proud of Oxford, but I think the one thing that we do have here is a culture of working together on big problems. You know, there's lots of big problems across the planet that we need to solve. And the only way we're going to solve them is by coming together across disciplines, across divisions, working with industry, working with governments, working with regulators, working with patient groups, etc. And importantly, working with other countries. These are international endeavors. You know, we can't do them in Oxford on our own. We can't do them in the UK on our own. We need to work with global partners, etc. So there's this culture of collaboration, working together on big problems to come up with big solutions. So these, for me, are some of the lessons from this vaccine story over the past year. So now let's think about the problem. What's the problem we're trying to tackle? So the problem, of course, is that rare diseases, well, unfortunately, there's more than 7,000 of them. We're identifying more than 250 new ones each year. If you add up all the patients, it's more than 350 million patients. 30% of these kids do not reach the age of 5, and it can take 6 to 8 years to get a diagnosis. And tragically, more than 95% of them have no treatment, no FDA-approved treatment. It is, when I think about it, you know, to be a patient must be awful. But to be a parent or a carer and have a child who has one of these rare conditions and has no treatment, honestly, it is a tragedy. The other challenge, of course, we've got is that drug discovery, we know it's very costly. On average, everybody accepts to generate a new drug can be $3 or $4 billion. It's also very risky. We hear about, certainly for sort of common diseases, taking most of our ideas when we take them into the clinic, so we do phase 2 type trials in patients, the failure rate can be 90%. I've heard figures as high as 95%. Most of our ideas, when we take them from the lab into the clinic, they do not work. They fail. 9 times out of 10, they fail. So it's very risky. And of course, it's also very slow. You know, sort of to develop a drug can take anywhere between 10, 12, 15 years. It is too slow. Now, of course, in academia, if we try and do this on working on a single disease, on a single target, and applying for sort of small grants for the next 1 year or 2 year sequentially, it's just too slow. You know, you put in an application for a grant, it takes 6 months to get some feedback. You may or may not get it. If you don't get it, you apply elsewhere. If you do get it, then you've got funding for 1 or 2 years, and then 1 or 2 years later, you're applying again, etc. So if you just build in these delays, it is too slow. Now, Oxford is full of some absolute superstars. And I've mentioned some of them already, but one of my favorites is Alex Bullock. He is an absolute genius. Now, let me share with you a story that Alex, who he's doing so many things, but one of the things he's done is he's been working on a rare disease called Stoneman syndrome, or fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. So basically, back in 2006-07, our colleague Paul Wordsworth identified the gene that is mutated in this particular disease. Alex Bullock took that gene and he worked out, purified that protein. He worked out the structure of that protein, the three-dimensional structure of that protein. He mapped all the mutations onto this structure. He showed that these mutations, so the protein is actually a kinase, an enzyme, and he showed that the mutations cause a gain of function. So the kinase is more active. So from a therapeutic perspective, what you want to develop is an inhibitor. You want to sort of suppress the activity of that enzyme. So he showed that the mutations caused a gain of function of this particular kinase. He then identified a small molecule inhibitor. He then worked with a collaborator at Harvard who has developed an animal model of fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, who put this inhibitor into these animals, and it reversed that disease or stopped the progression of that disease. That was exciting. Then Alex managed to find that AstraZeneca had a molecule which was in phase 3 at the time for other indications, but this particular molecule called saracatinib, it's a Src kinase inhibitor. Fortuitously, it was also an inhibitor of this particular kinase, ALK2, ACVR1 ALK2, linked to fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. So he managed to persuade AstraZeneca to give him that molecule. And then he applied to various agencies, but has recently got funding from the European Union to do a phase 2 trial in fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva with this AstraZeneca molecule, saracatinib. So he started that clinical study. It'll take probably another year, year and a half to get the study complete. But that is a phase 2 study. So imagine to go from gene in 2006, 2007, to doing a phase 2 clinical study in patients. And that was because he managed to get a phase 3 molecule that AstraZeneca had already developed. That has taken, 14, 15 years. It is still 3, 4, 5 years away from the market. So 20 years, it is just too slow. So the solution is we need to pool resources. By resources, I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about patient resources, clinical resources, access to patient material, databases, etc. We need to pool resources, we need to pool infrastructure, so technologies, platforms. We need to pool expertise in drug discovery, expertise in animal models, expertise in designing clinical trials, deep expertise in sort of the phenotype of the patients, etc. We need to pool this expertise. We need to exploit new technologies, AI, machine learning, etc. We need to define ambitious goals, and we need to accelerate this process. 15, 20 years in 2021 is just ludicrous. I think we have an opportunity. The opportunity is because many pharma companies are now getting more and more interested in rare diseases. So Pfizer have active programs, Sanofi have active programs, Takeda also recently, a couple of years ago, they acquired a rare disease company called Shire for more than $60 billion. $60 billion for a rare disease company. So Takeda have active programs, etc. We also know that if we actually manage to develop an asset for rare diseases, we can get accelerated approval, we can get tax vouchers, etc. And I'm also very excited that sort of once we demonstrate that a target or a protein or a molecule modulates a rare disease, I believe some of those biological disease insights will give us a better understanding of some of the more common diseases, some of the more complex diseases. So I think the timing is perfect. So let me share with you what we've been doing in Oxford over the past several years. So Matthew Wood, who you all know, he's our leader in this space, and he's one of this university's great clinician scientists. He is a brilliant innovator. He's a brilliant entrepreneur. He's becoming a serial entrepreneur, and he's also a wonderful, wonderful leader and a great friend. So Matthew Wood, together with Kay Davis, a world-renowned geneticist, Wyatt Yu, who is an amazing structural biologist, who in Oxford has developed a whole pipeline of new drug targets for rare diseases, and Jenny Taylor, who is also an expert geneticist, very keen and very focused on rare diseases, etc. So these four individuals, over the past few years, they built this Oxford Rare Disease Network. And this Oxford Rare Disease Network comprises something like 250 PIs working on more than 350 rare diseases. And these PIs they're basic scientists, they're developing assays, they're developing animal models, they're trying to generate small molecule modulators or antibodies or gene therapies, etc. They are clinicians, they have access to patients, etc. It is an amazing, amazing network. Matthew has also just recently, with significant funding from the UK government, created what he's called the Nucleic Acid Therapy Accelerator. So this is based at Harwell. Harwell is about 10 miles south of Oxford. It's a big national facility. There's lots of infrastructure, lots of highly expensive technologies and platforms, etc. So he's building this institute, the Nucleic Acid Therapy Accelerator in Harwell, and that is focused on trying to accelerate new gene therapies. Also, 5-6 years ago in Oxford, John Bell and colleagues created this fund called the Oxford Science Innovation Fund. And so this was more than £600 million to help Oxford academics translate their ideas into the clinic, to commercialize them, to create companies, etc. It's fair to say 5 years ago, Oxford was producing maybe 4 or 5 companies a year. We're now producing probably 25 companies a year. This has been the impact of this fund. It's headed up by a brilliant clinician named Alexis Dormandy, who also trained in Oxford, and their chief operating officer is a wonderful guy, Jim Wilkinson. So that's been fantastic. Another one of our great clinician scientists is Bob McLaren, and I'm sure many of you have heard about him. He, a few years ago, set up this company called Nightstar. It's focused on rare inherited retinal diseases. This was recently acquired by Biogen, and I think we're expecting phase 3 data sometime this quarter, certainly the first half of this year. So that's also very exciting. And recently, Matthew Wood and John Bell have built very strong relations with the Harrington Discovery Institute. So the Harrington Discovery Institute is headed up by Jonathan Stamler, a brilliant leader. He's their president, and also a chap named Mukesh Jain, who's their CSO, a wonderful clinician scientist. Both of them are real visionaries, and they want to completely transform drug discovery in rare diseases. So Jonathan and Mukesh and Matthew and John Bell established the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Centre. And what I love about it is they've set themselves a really ambitious goal. In the next decade, we are going to work together and we're going to generate 5 new drugs for rare diseases in neurological conditions, developmental disorders, or rare cancers. Now, this is a wonderful initiative because, of course, Jonathan and Mukesh have got so much expertise around therapeutic drug discovery. So combining that with some of the capabilities we have in Oxford is just going to be amazing. And then in Oxford for the past, since 2004, an organization called the SGC has been generating open tools for drug discovery. So what I mean by that is what we've been doing is we've been focusing on novel genes that we believe are therapeutically important. And for those genes, what we've been doing is we've been generating packages of tools. So we've been purifying the human protein. We've been building biophysical, biochemical assays. We've been working out the structure of that protein. We've been generating small molecule inhibitors of that for that protein. We've also, in some cases, been generating antibodies. So these packages, we call them target enabling packages because it will enable those targets both in academia and in industry. So we've been working with 10 large pharmaceutical companies to generate these target enabling packages. We've generated more than 40 of them in the past 5 years, and more than half of these are for rare diseases. So these are novel genes that we know lead to some of these rare conditions. We've also been generating small molecule inhibitors. These inhibitors are potent, they're selective, they're cell active. We know they work in cellular assays. And what we've been doing is generating novel inhibitors and then making them freely available to the world. So as a consequence, we've been working with hundreds of academics all over the world. We've been working with 7 patient organizations and also a number of SMEs, as well as, of course, these 10 large pharmaceutical companies. Now, by generating these probes, of course, and making them freely available, these inhibitors, making them freely available, we've accelerated academic research, we've accelerated publications on those genes, we've accelerated translational studies, we've accelerated proprietary programs in these pharma companies, and we've also enabled the creation of new biotechs. So the first of these probes was for a protein called BRD4, and we generated an inhibitor for that more than a decade ago. That inhibitor we've made freely available. That's led to thousands of publications. It's led to lots of translational programs in academia and industry. It's led to proprietary programs in pharma. And then in 2011-12, Jay Bradner, who at the time was at the Dana-Farber in Boston, who we worked with to generate this inhibitor for this BRD4 protein, he created a company called Tensure Therapeutics. And then in, I think, around about 2015-16, Tensure Therapeutics was acquired by Roche for nearly $500 million. So we've also enabled the creation of new companies. And this BRD4 protein was for a rare cancer, a nut midline carcinoma. It's a very rare cancer. And of course, Jay, who's now the head of research at Novartis, is an expert oncologist. He had access to patient material from nut midline carcinoma patients. So he evaluated this inhibitor in these patient-derived cancer cells. And he actually showed that this inhibitor increased apoptosis, it decreased proliferation, and it also stopped the growth of tumor in these mouse models, etc. So this is what we've been doing in the SGC, generating open tools to accelerate science, to accelerate innovation, to help the pharmaceutical industry, to help academics create new companies, etc., etc. So that's what we've been doing in Oxford over the past several years. So what can we leverage sitting here in the UK? Now, in the UK, many of you are aware that there's a project called Genomics England. So initially this was funded by the UK government, the Wellcome Trust, and a number of other funders to generate the sequence of 100,000 human genomes. And these were focused on patients with rare diseases or with cancer. Now, they've more than 18 months ago, they've done the 100,000. Now they've got funding to do 500,000, so another 400,000 human genomes, again, focused on rare diseases and cancer. And they will do that 500,000 probably by 2023, 2024. Now, of course, these large 500,000 human genomes, several of which are on for patients with rare diseases, you can imagine there's going to be lots of novel insights. So we intend to exploit those novel insights. I've already mentioned at Harwell, there's some amazing national infrastructure. One of these is the Diamond Light Source, headed up by one of our colleagues, Dave Stewart. This is the Diamond Light Synchrotron. And Diamond Light Source, it's the synchrotron that allows us to, for example, do crystallography, structural biology at speed. And then a couple of years ago, a new institute's been set up there called the Rosalind Franklin Institute, headed up by, again, one of our colleagues, Jim Naismith. And he is developing new technologies which are going to be useful for drug discovery in the coming years, etc. And so we're working closely with Dave Stewart and also Jim Naismith. Now, of course, one of the biggest infrastructures we have in the UK, which is absolutely relevant to us, is the NHS, the National Health Service. We have basically, more than 65 million patients. We have data on them from birth all throughout life and potentially to death, etc. And we intend to exploit these data sets. And of course, much of that data is being looked at, annotated in UK Biomed. And then, of course, a few years ago, the UK government also set up a number of catapults. And so catapults were set up basically to accelerate the generation of new industry in certain areas. So one of the catapults that they set up about 3 or 4 years ago is the Medicines Discovery Catapult. It's headed up by a colleague, Chris Malloy. It's based in Manchester, and they are focused on, again, developing technologies that are necessary for drug discovery. But importantly, this catapult has built a very large network with biotechs and CROs and also patient groups, etc. So we're working closely with Chris. So we intend to leverage all of these capabilities and resources in Genomics England, the Diamond Light Source, Rosalind Franklin Institute, the NHS, and the Medicines Discovery Catapult in Manchester. So let me share with you what we're now doing in Oxford. So we've just recently built a collaboration with the King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia, and with a chap named Hani Chowdhury. Hani Chowdhury is a DPhil student of our Nobel Prize winner from last year, Peter Ratcliffe. Hani is an absolute visionary. And so his university and ours are going to work together to use AI to try and accelerate new drugs for rare diseases, but also cardiometabolic diseases. And part of this project is that we will also create IP in potentially new companies. Also in Oxford, we're now building a new centre. This is the brainchild of Richard Cornwall, who's now the head of the Nuffield Department of Clinical Medicine, an awesome individual. So his idea is to create this Centre for Medicines Discovery. So it's going to do exactly what it says on the tin. The ambition is we are going to accelerate the discovery and development of new medicines for patients. And we're going to do that by leveraging all the resources that we have in Oxford and with our sort of collaborators and partners across the UK and the rest of the world, etc. And we're going to do this in a number of areas. We're doing it in neurodegenerative diseases and neuropsychiatric diseases. And that effort is headed up by a brilliant scientist named John Davis. Secondly, we're going to create a pipeline of new drug targets for inflammatory diseases, and that's headed up by Alex Bullock. We're also going to have a pipeline around cancer headed up by Tim Elliott. Rare diseases is headed up by Wyatt Yu, working, of course, closely with Matthew Wood, etc. And then we're also planning to do one on cardiometabolic diseases, headed up by a brilliant cardiologist named Keith Shannon here in Oxford. Now, with all of these different therapeutic areas, what we intend to do is to work closely with lots of academic colleagues across Oxford to access these academic innovations. We intend to work with lots of clinicians who are working in the NHS, who have access to patients, etc. But we're also in each of these areas going to form deep partnerships with 2 or 3 pharma companies. And so these partnerships we're currently building in the rare disease area to sort of help us move these things forward, etc. So that's the Centre for Medicines Discovery. A couple of years ago, Oxford managed to pull back from Cambridge a brilliant clinician named Duncan Richards. So Duncan Richards actually trained as a medic in Oxford at Merton College. He went to work for GSK. He was heading up their clinical trial facility based in Cambridge. So he came to join us a couple of years ago in Oxford. We're now building a clinical trial facility because when we generate these new molecules, we want to rapidly move them into clinical trials in the NHS with local clinicians under the leadership of Duncan Richards, etc. The other thing we're doing is we're building extensive links with a number of pharma companies. We're also talking to a number of philanthropists, and we're also talking to a number of investors. Because if we're going to accelerate our pipeline, our plans, our ambitions in rare diseases, we need more resources to really push these things into the clinic as quickly as we can. So those are some of the things that we're currently doing. So finally, why am I optimistic about the future? I'm optimistic because I think some of the platforms that we now have access to, which we didn't have 3, 4, 5 years ago, including things like AI, I think we can use that to accelerate the generation of clinical molecules. I think we can use it to help us identify new drug targets. I think we can use it to help us identify new biomarker signatures, new ways of stratifying patients, identify other indications for existing drugs, and potentially also come up with new combination strategies for patients. I'm also immensely excited about some of the biomarker platforms that we now have, and we didn't have a few years ago. So, for example, if you think of fluid biomarkers, a company named Somalogics, based in Boulder, Colorado, but they've set up a research branch in Oxford, they can, with a tiny sample of blood, they can measure 5,000 different proteins. In a couple of years, it'll be 10,000. In probably 3 years, it'll be all 20,000. So on in one tiny sample of blood, we can get sort of 5,000 readouts, etc. And if you think of the imaging platforms that are now available, I mean, in San Diego now you can do a whole body image in 20 minutes for $600. So you can imagine the data that you're going to be generating on each patient. And then with some of these wearable platforms, of course, you can measure parameters in patients 24/7, longitudinally, continuously, night and day. We are in the era where on each individual, on each patient, we can generate tens of thousands of data points. And of course, if you combine that with AI, machine learning, I believe we are going to come up with new understanding of disease. We're going to come up with new biomarker signatures, new ways of stratifying patients. And these, of course, will help us to design better clinical trials, better phase 2 clinical trials. But I'm also very, very excited in Oxford because we've got access to some amazing experts, some wonderful innovators, entrepreneurs, leaders. We're working with a number of patient organizations, disease foundations. We've got, fortunately, some amazing resources, but we're trying to grow those even further because we've got some big goals. We've got access to great infrastructure within the university, but also outside the university. We've got leaders like Jonathan and Mukesh and Matthew who are really pushing us as hard as we can. We've set ourselves some very ambitious goals. And to be fair, I think in Oxford, there's a real sense of confidence. And together, we're going to do the impossible, and we're going to do it again. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. And we're here to help in any way we can. We have to change the lives of these 350 million patients across the world with rare diseases. So thank you.
All right, welcome back. And thank you, Professor Bantra, for that really thoughtful and incredibly inspiring presentation. So we're going to move into the last segment of our program today, and we have time for a few questions and answers. I'll just remind the audience that right under your player window, you can submit questions. If we are unable to get through to all of them, we will certainly try to answer them on our website, and I'll have information about that in just a few moments. And now we're happy to try to answer questions. And I'll start with a few that have already come in. The first question was, I was interested in what Professor Bantra said about rare disease impacting other diseases. How will the Oxford-Harrington Center approach this? So very important question, and perhaps I can ask my colleague Matthew to take this one on.
Well, thank you, Mukesh. It is an important question, and Professor Bantra did highlight this. I think our focus is rare disease, and we're acutely aware of the challenge and the fact that there are 7,000 or more rare diseases. So although we may only be able to focus our attention on a relatively small number of these diseases to start with, I think our absolute priority is to have an impact on other rare diseases. In other words, if we develop a drug for one disease, could it have an impact on other rare diseases? If we develop a new technology that's applicable to one disease, could it be applicable to other rare diseases? So I think our first priority is to seek impact, the widest possible impact on rare diseases. But it's true to say, as Professor Bantra highlighted, that many of these rare diseases and developing treatments for them will provide novel insights into how we might be able to treat more common diseases. And so while that isn't an explicit goal of ours and of the Harrington Oxford Rare Disease Center, it is something that we think is possible. And if that's an outcome of our work, we'd obviously be thrilled. But our focus is absolutely on rare diseases and maximizing the impact of our efforts to cure as many rare diseases as possible.
Thanks, Matthew. The next one, and I can take this one. How did the partnership come about between the University of Oxford and the Harrington Discovery Institute? So the idea to combine the strengths of these two institutions actually came about rather organically. The Harrington Discovery Institute was supporting the efforts of several investigators at Oxford. And through this engagement, we began to have interactions. That's Dr. Stanley and myself with Professor Wood, Bell, Hollander, Bantra, and many other colleagues at Oxford. And we came to appreciate not only our complementary strengths, but our common interest in rare disease. And so it is that engagement that led to the founding of the Oxford-Harrington Rare Disease Center. The next question, Matthew, is the goal of developing multiple new drugs in the next decade is really ambitious. What has to happen in order for your center to reach that goal?
Well, I agree it's an ambitious goal. Some may say it's not ambitious enough given the scale of the challenge. But I think Mukesh is, as we outlined earlier on for the audience, I think we have all the raw material that we need in terms of outstanding science and world-class drug development to succeed. And I think that the ingredient that we really need is collaboration, is partnership. We cannot succeed without working in collaboration with partners, families, foundations, industry, philanthropy, and working globally between the UK and the US and with many other countries and around the world. So I think that ingredient, that is the crucial ingredient for our success, is building this consortium of partners. And I think we're well on the way to doing that.
All right, thanks, Matthew. An additional question, do you think the pandemic and all the effort that has gone into it will take away from rare disease research? So I can take this one on, and it's certainly a very fair question. But I actually am optimistic, and I derive additional optimism from the words of Professor Bountrep. So as you heard, we have made remarkable progress in combating the pandemic, more to be done, but the global effort has been inspiring. It has been aggressive, and we have a number of vaccines and additional therapies that undoubtedly are in the pipeline and will be forthcoming. But I think as Professor Bountrep said, we learned so much through this experience. There were lessons learned about global collaboration, the importance of leveraging science, technology. He spoke about artificial intelligence. And it is these capabilities coupled with drug development expertise at a very high level that we hope to leverage in the Oxford-Harrington Center to address unmet rare diseases. But as I said before, we can't do this alone. And we need all of your help, partnerships from patients, families, the interest in pharma, which is significant, as Professor Bountrep noted, foundations, and various other diverse constituents. So I, for one, am certainly very optimistic that the timing is now, the time is right for us to take on major challenges like rare diseases. Let me look at my next question, Matthew, and maybe this one I can direct to you. The question is very scientific. Is base substitution technology, for example, Beam and Verve, the best approach for rare diseases? Is it fast? Is it flexible? Your thoughts?
Oh, well, it's a very good question, Mukesh. And I think, it speaks to the advances in technology that have appeared, within the last decade. So base editing and RNA editing, amongst many other types of technologies in editing, really has immense precision and immense capability to be transformative as a technology for treating rare diseases and more common diseases. But to say that it would be the best, I think is premature. I think there's still a lot of work to be done to really understand how to apply the technology, to understand which rare disease conditions may be the ones which would be best suited to a base editing approach. And of course, there are many other genetic therapies and therapy technologies that will inevitably be valuable for rare disease therapy development, as well as the more traditional types of small molecule drugs that will still have a very important place in the armory against rare diseases. So, while it's exciting as a new technology, as a new therapeutic approach, I still think there's a lot that we need to learn about how best to develop it and best to apply it in the context of rare diseases.
All right, thank you, Matthew. So I'm being advised that it's time for us to wrap up so that we end on a timely fashion. I will acknowledge that we have many, many more questions that we're going to be able to answer. And we will do our best to take those questions and answer them on our website. And so let me just conclude by thanking the audience for joining us today and participating in this first event. There will be others to follow. We also want to thank our community partners and stakeholders for sharing their personal stories with us today. Their courage inspires us to address this urgent need to develop cures and therapies for those with rare diseases. As Professor Bountrep shared with us at the beginning of this lecture, if we want to solve big problems like a global pandemic or curing rare disease, we have to create a culture of collaboration working together. And that is what the Oxford-Harrington Center seeks to achieve. So in closing, we invite you to join us on our journey to improve the lives of the nearly 350 million individuals around the world with a rare disease. With your support, we can accelerate the pace and develop rare disease medicines. So please stay connected with us by following us on Twitter, emailing us as shown on your screen at information@oxfordharrington.org. Also, if you're interested in seeing the full patient videos, they're available on oxfordharrington.org. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again for joining us today. Be safe and be well.